Namaste and welcome to Urban Chatterati. This is Abhinav Prakash. And today I'm joined by Razib Khan, who needs no introduction on this podcast. He's a scientist based out of US and a keen observer of the politics of the Indian subcontinent. So Rajib, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be on. I just want to say my parents love you, as I just told you before we get on. Everyone, keep forwarding my stuff to my parents. I don't know how they got it. They live in the United States, but anyway, they enjoyed the show and they think you're doing a great job. So just want to pass that on.
Thanks. Convey my thanks to them and namaste as well.
Yeah.
Rajib, let's start with the discussion today. We are seeing some controversy in India regarding some, Institute of Social Science, which has been parroting the propaganda of Lashkar-e-Taiba and Jamaat Islami kind of institutions, basically trying to copy the Western social science fashion of expressing solidarity, this woke culture about, taking extreme positions. So in the case of Kashmir, they are taking the position which is taken normally by Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jamaat Islami. Why do you think that the social sciences in India and also in Bangladesh and also in Pakistan, I'm pretty sure about it, is so much dominated by the latest fashionable trends in the American universities?
Yeah, so as you know, scholarship is global. The Republic of Letters spans continents, it spans oceans. And, in the pre-modern era, you would have separate intellectual traditions using different paradigms, using different literal languages, but also different methodological languages, right? So within Islam, some of your listeners and viewers might know there's different Sharia madhabs, like traditions, and different ways to do jurisprudence. And some of the traditions emphasize logical analysis and individual reasoning, while the other traditions may emphasize precedent, like purely the life of the prophet. And so you have here like different intellectual traditions. The same is true more generally about the world. But more recently, there's this, I don't want to say positivist, because it's not exclusively positivist now, but there's this world intellectual tradition that came out of the West. The Western University, you're at a university yourself, and I know that there were university-like institutions in India, but let's be entirely frank, the institution that you work at is modeled on Western institutions. It's modeled on British institutions, right? So that is the dominant contingent instantiation of the university. Even if the idea of the university in India, China, and the Islamic world predates the West, the modern universities are built around Western models. There's Department of Engineering, literature, and then economics. So, social sciences have their own frameworks and methods. Now, economics is a particular case that I wanted to mention because they have a formal mathematical system that allows them to communicate. The neoclassical framework, if you're outside of this framework, they call you heterodox, because you use a different method. And so I think the reason that Western culture and Western viewpoints are spreading is because it's part of one intellectual community, united through the internet, united through journals and publications. And, Nassim Taleb has this idea called the firehouse effect. I don't think it's just from Taleb, but basically when people that are firefighters, in the United States, they hang out at a firehouse. Most of the time they're not doing anything and they just hang out and they talk. And when people talk in the same room just with each other, they start to agree on everything because they like each other and they don't have strong opinions on anything. They don't have strong opinions on a lot of things. And then it gets really extreme. So in the Indian case, for example, I don't know all the details here, but I can tell you I have talked to people in the United States that have strong opinions on Kashmir because of solidarity. They don't have strong opinions on Kashmir. I don't know how you say it. But your viewers or listeners are going to make fun of my accent. I don't care. Okay, make fun of my accent. But they don't know where it is on the map. They don't know anything about it, but they do know that Modi is a Nazi and a white supremacist. And so they're with Kashmir. They believe in solidarity. They don't have really strong opinions or views or knowledge of areas outside the United States necessarily, but they believe in solidarity. And the solidarity is really important. Now, this seems a little ridiculous in an Indian context because they do know about Kashmir. They do know about Modi. But the solidarity is so strong that it's overwhelming them. Now, let me use an analogy. In the United States, there's a movement in a lot of Protestant churches to normalize homosexuality, homosexual marriage, gay marriage, LGBTQIAA++ or something squared. I don't know. But in any case, so that's a big thing in the United States. It's not a big thing in Africa. In Africa, they still oppose it, but they get a lot of their funds from American churches. So the Anglican Communion in Africa is huge. It's influential culturally. The Episcopal Church in the United States is not very huge. It's culturally kind of a little bit influential. Like it used to be the church for the presidents and the cultural elite, but they give, it's a wealthy church and they give a lot of money to Africa. So African churches have to make this decision. Should we continue to oppose homosexual behavior as stridently and alienate our funding base, or should we just kind of like soft pedal? This is obviously what's happening. So money talks, influence talks, power talks. And so why does Western social science dominate? Because it's power. Like what this is exposing is a power game. So imagine you're an Indian academic. And this is hypothetical. I know that a lot of no Indian academic would do this, but should you be cultivating the mores, beliefs, and norms of wealthy Western academic funding granting institutions, or shouldn't you? Because you never know. You never know. So why not? Why not? So academia is about scholarship. It's about making analysis. It's about truth before all. But the reality is, this is an ideal. This is not the reality. And I think what you're seeing in this sort of behavior is conforming to Western norms because that's where the money is. That's where the prestige is. And who knows, maybe they could get an appointment at the School of Journalism at Harvard, if they did. See, I know what's going on in India, okay? You know what I'm talking about. You never know. So I think, what I'm talking about, I think it's power, it's money, it's influence. Would you rather be part of a small community in India, or do you want to be part of a world community whose bastion is in Western Europe and the United States? And a lot of people would want to be part of the world community. My field, genetics, it's run out of England, the USA, and to a lesser extent Germany. I mean, there's a few places in France and other areas and Japan, but really, those are the places that Indians will get postdoctoral training, even if they come back to India. And so it's genetics. It's not as politicized, but you can probably see the influence of people trained in the West when they come back. They bring their training, they bring their culture, they bring their mores. And when they go to conferences, they still go to conferences that are dominated by these Western scientists with their own values. And Western scientists themselves, MIT just did this thing about they're going to not do work in solidarity with marginalized communities in STEM. And, there's a long history of anti-Blackness in chemistry. This is stupid, in my opinion. I'm not going to lie. But it shows you the political orientation of these scientists, of these elite scientists. And so I'm sure that's going to have an effect on Indian scientists who have their own culture and their own views. Because these are their colleagues, these are the people they respect and their peers. So I think this sort of behavior, if you find it inexplicable, I think you need to think of what their cultural orientation, their real identity is. Like what club would they want to belong in?
Yes.
Do they want to belong in the club of Abhinav Prakash, or do they want to belong in the club of Abhijit Banerjee?
Oh my goodness, that's
I just made that up. But I think that was very funny. I don't know. Sorry, I'm being a little
self-conscious. The Vokes don't like Abhijit Banerjee because he met with Prime Minister Modi and he spoke good thing about his policies. And
I know. And I wanted to use the name because it sounded the same to me.
Arundhati Roy, right?
So, yeah. Okay. Yeah. But she lives in India, right? So, but anyway, my only point here is, this is about being popular, being in the popular club, and I think a lot of the left in India, to be frank, has lost its perspective about where they live and who they are. And so they identify with this global culture, and the global culture is dominated by the West. I think people outside the West, you guys, because I think of myself as a Western person, you guys need to stand on your own feet and yell back at us sometimes, because we're not always right. We're just powerful. We're just rich, And so one way you solve it is become powerful and be rich. But you can't do that. You can't do that overnight,
True. You have pointed it out very correctly, Razib, that you see that in journalism, it's no longer about investigating and reporting the truth. It's about holding those in power accountable. So narratives matter, not the facts. Same in academia. It's no longer about investigating, researching the facts and publishing them. It's about expressing solidarity, standing with the marginalized, standing against the oppression, standing for some lofty ideas. So this is a I think this is happening across the institution. We're seeing a degeneration in the basics of the civilization itself, in my opinion. That is no longer about the facts, it's all about narratives and expressing certain kind of solidarity. But Razib, when we come to India, people are trying to be woke, just like they're doing that in Canada, UK, in America. But often they forget and they realize they live in India. And then they realize that wokeism in India is basically Hindutva. Do you agree to that? Remember when in America Black Lives Matter was going on, so these people were toppling statues in America and also in the UK. Certain woke people in India left-wing woke started saying, we should also do the same in India. We should also demolish the symbols of oppression. And then people say, well, yes, let's go and demolish Qutub Minar. Then they realize, oh my goodness, if we do wokeism in India, is the Hindu right which will get empowered. Do you agree to that?
Well, so you're thinking of wokeism as a general abstract principle rather than a product of a particular history. I think wokeism operationally as a product of a particular history. It's a contingent cultural formation that's aligned around American priorities. So they're going and doing Black Lives Matter marches in Tampere, Finland. There are no black people in Tampere, Finland. You can tell the Somalis they're black, but don't tell them. So they're going to get very mad at you, So my point is, so wokeism, like, what are you talking about? You're talking about power, oppression, history, trauma, wounded civilization. These are called facts. They don't understand what you're talking about here. The issue here is like, what do you have to say about the enslavement, marginalization, and oppression of American descendants of slaves in India? What do you have to say about that?
American descendants of slaves in India?
Yeah. What do you have to say?
Nothing. I don't know what we are talking about.
Exactly. It makes no sense. Right? Like, it's not, because you're trying to say like, oh, well, it's about oppression. They don't care about your oppression. I'm sorry I'm yelling, but like, I know these people. I've tried to talk facts with them. Oh, your facts, They don't care about your history. It doesn't matter to them. Okay? What matters to them maybe is when white people show up. Okay? But the issue is the Islamic period in India was great because Muslims are POC. They're people of color. People of color cannot oppress other people of color. Okay? Muslims are people of color. So if you're against Islam, you're against people of color. That's racist because if it's not anti-racist, it's racist. Do you understand how the algebra is working here?
But Hindus are not people of color.
You can't be against Islam because Islam is.
But Hindus are not
white supremacists. Yeah, because they're white supremacists. Swastika. Hello. Do you think that you get to control your own narrative and your own culture? No, you don't. That's for them. That's raw material for their ideology. So the ideology of wokeness, as it's issued out of the United States, is a very American ideology with American context, with American concerns. It centers around the reactive reflexes. This might get me canceled for the 12th time. It centers around the reactive reflexes of Black Americans and a hegemonic overclass of gentry liberals. It's their concerns, gentry white liberals, their concerns, their history, their priority. When you try to adapt it to other contexts, it's oddly fitted because it is not a general principle of justice and remuneration and redistribution. It is not a general principle. If it was a general principle, then yes, some of the things that you say would. And I've talked to people who are Hindu nationalist sympathetic, Hindutva sympathetic, who talk about intergenerational trauma about what the Muslims did to their ancestors. And so they try to use it in that framework. And, I'm frankly opposed to this sort of, I don't want to say slave morality, but slave morality, like, be a man, even if you're a woman, just like stand up and be who you are.
You just got canceled for the 13th time.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, don't stop talking about Aurangzeb. Talk about Shivaji.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? Why are you crying about what the Mughals did to you? Like, be proud of what you did to them. Just, that's my philosophy, but let's just set that aside. I think the issue with wokeness and coming to India and why it seems strange is because it is not a general principle about interrogating historical oppression. It's a specific principle about interrogating aspects of American history and positional games within the American elite. So if you are a upper middle class privileged white person, you can capture positional status by identifying with American descendants of slaves and flagellating your own ancestors. And then you can go to Starbucks and get your, latte and continue to live your life. And so I don't want to sound like a Marxist, but it allows the capitalist superstructure to be maintained while people can continue to engage in virtue signaling and symbolic, submission. So it's symbolic submission to a particular narrative, and it's an inversion. It's an inversion of the power structure symbolically. It is a symbolic Kali Yuga. We live. There are no all the our Kshatriyas. Our soldiers now are non-binary twinks. It's just, you don't know the context in America, but like a general was asked recently about why he was reading critical race theory and stuff. So it's really crazy right now in the United States. And so you're getting a little bit of our craziness. And that's why it doesn't make any sense. And it seems crazy because it is crazy. And it's not about India's history, and it's not about logic, and it's not about understanding how India grapples with its history. It's about sitting at the foot of Western liberals who have their own preoccupations that they're working through, and they're making you part of their narrative.
Yeah.
So Go on, Abhinav.
We see that, especially in the Western media. There was recent some comedian from India was hired to make a video on how COVID deaths in India were state-sponsored massacres. And you see that in the Western media every time, the reporting has nothing to do with the facts on the ground. It must fit with the Western perspective of the world about good guys, bad guys, Nazis versus fascists, oppressed people versus oppressors, and so on. So you are right about that. And many of these people who are writing this kind of work in institutes like this, India occupied Kashmir, Indian occupation in Kashmir, they're doing so because they want a scholarship to the Western universities, and many of them are there. Many of the people who written such theses, they get a placement in the Western universities. There's this professor in the Brown University. I've heard him in a conference in India. And he says the same thing everywhere. So he was presenting a paper and saying that, India is becoming an ethnic democracy like Israel and Pakistan and so on. But India will be very worse than Israel or Pakistan because India is a Hindu majority country. So Israel is a Jewish, Pakistan is Islamic majority country. So their ethnic democracies will still have some better moral standards than a Hindu ethnic democracy. And this guy is a Hindu himself, right? But he's playing to the galleries back in his own university. But you're right. But why do you think that Indians are so obsessed with their history rather than thinking about the future or working on the frontier areas of knowledge production?
It's not just Indians, obviously. You could say the Chinese are obsessed with their history and the century of, humiliation, right? This is a human norm. But going back to India, I think they're obsessed with their history because, it is still an open book that its chapter hasn't been completed. So these narratives of the wounded civilization, how to understand and assimilate the reality of Islam in the Indian subcontinent, how to assimilate the reality of Jati Varna caste in the Indian subcontinent. There's a lot of unresolved questions. I think the future social organization, the cultural orientation of India. We've talked about the fact that I do think the Hindu nationalist, the Hindu identity perspective, at least in English language, is just not very articulated. It's very reactive. It's very emotive. When it's emotive and reactive, it's not a contingent interlocking system where A leads to B, which leads to C, which leads to, So, and also there's like a suspicion of other people. And I do have to say I enjoy the comments on your blog or on your YouTube and Kushal Mehra. I really enjoy the comments that accuse me of being a stealth jihadi. This is a low quality. I'm not personally offended. I think it's funny, but I think it is a low quality of analysis at this point. But some people they're being purely reactive instead of actually listening to what I'm saying, and I'm making jokes about Islam, which like no Indian would do because you guys are scared of Muslims. I'm not like totally joking. Like even Hindus, like they get like kind of uncomfortable if I make jokes about Islam because you've been culturally traumatized in the past and in the present. And so I think you need to confront the trauma and think about like how you're going to deal with it. Because Muslims, for example, Indian Muslims and in subcontinental Muslims, they have a fake ideology of who they are as like Persians and Turks and Iranians, but that's a really, really robust ideology. The illusion is strong in them, right? And so they can talk proudly, privately about how they ruled the Hindus, the Kuffar, and they knew their place and all this stuff. But that's a reasonable narrative, and I think Hindu nationalists and Hindus, and Hindu nationalists, they're not like I've talked to Hindus in America many decades ago. Hindu nationalism has basically been the dominant viewpoint privately and secretly, even if people in public voted for Congress or whatever, So this is the default position for a lot of Indians. And I think they need to figure out, though, something that's not just reactive, but again, something that's like a coherent, forward-thinking, positive vision. And so the reason that I think Indians talk about the past right now is because they don't have a positive, forward-thinking vision. Like what is like a Hindu India that is not part of the Islamic world, not part of the Cynic world, not part of the Western world? What does that look like? And are there going to be multiple different languages in India, or is it going to be Hindi speaking? I've seen arguments about this actually on the Clubhouse platform. And I just observed because I was just curious. And there were some really intense arguments, and there were Hindu nationalists from South India who got extremely angry at the idea that everyone should learn Hindi. Okay, that's a question you need to solve for yourself. I think like in the Islamic world, there's not the idea that everyone should learn Arabic. So just giving you a hint of what I think of this idea. So how feasible it is. In any case, so Hindu nationalists need to resolve things like this about their cultural orientation, their cultural identity. I do think the Jati Varna system and caste will be a lot less influential in 100 to 200 years. Just if you look at the intermarriage rates, it's not sustainable. You can't maintain this system when endogamy is only 90% as opposed to 99%. Now, I understand that 90%, it seems a lot to the listener, but multiply that out over 8 to 12 generations, like think in terms of centuries. You're going to have too many people that are of multi-caste, multi-jati background to really have this system be as well integrated as it is today. And so, okay, like think in terms of centuries. If Hindu civilization's been around for, like, I think it's been around arguably for 2,000 years, but you could say 5,000 years to match the Chinese. Well, you think 100 to 200 years from now, how it's going to exist without the Jati Varna scaffold, because that's what you're going to have to face. Are you all going to become Christians and Muslims then? Because Hinduism can't survive without that? I don't think so, but that's not up to me. I think people who talk against caste, but it's because it's the easy thing to do, still live in a caste-ridden world, social world, need to confront their individual choices, because their individual choices arguably continue to live in the past and not in the future. Like, people need to start preparing for the world as it's going to be and not as it was. And I think that'll help a lot in developing clarity of thought. And if you have a vision for your future and you think that your great-grandchildren are going to be proud of their heritage and proud of their culture, whatever that may be, you're not going to think obsessively about past slights. Okay? Europeans, Spaniards did not obsess about the Islamic period because they conquered the Muslims and they created their own empire. So they had, Don Quixote, they had their own culture, they have their own language, like they have things going on. Once you have things going on, you're too busy to focus on the past.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you see in every discussion on India, everyone say, well, what happened? We have to go back to our original civilization. And what is original civilization? I mean, there is no such thing, in my opinion, as the original civilization, because civilization is always the work in progress. But let's come to the other part of this reason, which is Bangladesh, right? You are from Bangladesh, and Bangladesh is doing really good in the last 10, 15 years in terms of economic growth, falling population growth rate, and so on. So what exactly Bangladesh is doing, which is going right? And as compared to, let's say, Pakistan, the other side of the subcontinent, where everything is going downhill.
I don't even know. I feel like we've talked about this partly because I think people in India ask me about this all the time. So two things. I do find it amusing that every time people point out that Bangladesh's nominal GDP per capita is now higher than India. I think it's mostly because of COVID. I mean, I don't think it's going to be permanent. But in any case, Indians give an extremely long explainer on PPP. That's fine, but when you're having to explain why your nominal GDP per capita is actually lower, but actually PPP, blah blah blah, that's not good. Okay, when you're having to explain, you're 55 years old and you wanted to get married. Well, actually, there's all these reasons. That's fine. I understand that's a valid reason, but you still didn't get married. Okay. So your nominal GDP per capita is lower. That's what it is. And you can talk for another 15 minutes why that doesn't matter. Okay. What did Bangladesh do right that Pakistan didn't do? I think what Bangladesh did right is nothing, because Pakistan does too much. Okay. You have an extraterritorial empire in Afghanistan. You send terrorists into a nation 10 times larger than you. You make great frenemies with the United States, where after 9/11, George Bush basically threatened to invade unless you got into shape. Basically, Pakistan's problem is it thinks it's something it's not. It thinks it's a great power. It's not a great power. It's a regional power. It thinks that Iran and the Arab world respect it as an equal. They don't. When a bunch of Indians went to ISIS in Iraq, what happened to them? They were sent to clean the latrines.
Yeah.
Okay. This is what they think of people that look like us. Okay. That's just a fact. Okay. And the Pakistanis, yes, they're lighter skinned than maybe me or you, but look, they look more like us than they look like someone from Tehran. Okay. That's a fact. So there's that problem going on. So I think Pakistan is obsessed with ideals and visions of what it aspires to be without any realistic path of getting there. It is also focused on the past of this great rivalry of this Mughal civilization and whatnot, rather than focusing on how it can attend to its own affairs and mind its own business. So, what if Pakistan didn't focus on geopolitics? Okay. What if it allowed itself to be like an outgrowth of like the Chinese capitalist industrial state? How would the world be worse in any way for people in Pakistan and outside of Pakistan? Let's set aside Kashmir off to the side. That's a separate issue. I don't want to discuss that. But do they really need to get involved in Afghanistan? Is that really doing anything for them? Incubating all these terrorist groups that periodically get out of control and go into India and other places, is that really doing anything for them? They have next door an economy that's growing. They have to the north an economy that's dynamic. Like they have possible trade partners. But, the Chinese had a problem in Balochistan a few years ago, I remember, because some Baloch separatists attacked like an installation because they have political problems. They haven't taken care of their own political problems. So Bangladesh doesn't have the same political problems. It has different ones. It has coups. It has a corrupt state. It has a one-party state to some extent at this point. Because of economic growth, I think people have given the Awami League too much credit. But that's what always happens. The party in power gets too much of the blame and too much of the credit for economic growth and lack of growth, right? And so that's how it's going. I have a friend who's Polish, and he worked for the World Bank, and he lived in Dhaka. And he said, you have to understand, people in Bangladesh actually, they are orienting themselves to Southeast Asia, not South Asia. Like obviously we're brown people, Muslims, but like if you talk to Pakistanis, they'll talk about like Persia and
Turkey,
Turkey and stuff like that. If you talk to people in Bangladesh, I don't think they would do that. I mean, maybe some of them, but it's super cringe. It's just a super cringe behavior. People in Bangladesh know like we're like subcontinental people. We have brown skins. Most of them are Muslim, but also a lot of them go work in Singapore and Malaysia. And, it's like facing towards Southeast Asia. Like that's a vision of an export-driven economy based on textiles, going up the value chain. There's a plan. Now, will it be able to go up the value chain? I'm actually kind of skeptical. Talking to people from Bangladesh and elsewhere, like literacy rates, social, human capital is not the same as Vietnam, which has gone up the value chain. So I think there's an opportunity for a strong opportunity for failure, but you can't fail until you get to that point where you have the opportunity to fail. Like even, you know what I'm saying? Even the opportunity to, like Pakistan doesn't have an opportunity to fail as an export-oriented economy because it's not.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to have discussions about its human capital. We're just going to have discussions of like, how many terrorists is it not exporting? Like that's it. I mean, I know I'm being glib and I'm not being totally general, but when people think of Pakistan in most of the world, they're like, oh, because they're just like, they export political instability. When people think of Bangladesh, they used to think that it was a basket case, and now they think of textiles.
Yeah,
that's the difference.
Yeah, if you trace the terror attacks in European countries, or even in the Western hemisphere, the trails do lead to Pakistan in most instances, whereas Bangladesh is on its way to become the next tiger economy, as you rightly pointed out, of the Southeast Asia, rather than being part of the West Asia. But is this woke culture, or let's say this ultra progressive culture, also seeping into Pakistan and Bangladesh, or is this a uniquely Indian problem?
I mean, it is
all three are part of the Anglo-Saxon world, wider Anglo-Saxon world. So why do we think that India is uniquely affected, but we don't see much of it in Bangladesh or Pakistan?
So, I mean, I can speak to both a little bit. So I think Pakistan's issue is it has an Islamic identity, and Islam has a kind of, because it is the religion of becoming Muslim. Like you could be like a Swedish person and you convert to Islam and you become a person of color. Okay, so the Muslim religion is the leftist religion at prayer. I don't know how it happened, but that's partly because of all the national movements and left-wing national movements, I think in the 70s and 80s with the PLO. I think it created like a cultural connection. And now, if you say something, like I don't say anti-Muslim things on Twitter too much anymore, anti-Islamic things, because I don't want Twitter to ban me, because they've given me warnings in the past. You can't, they enforce blasphemy laws, basically, right? So, because I don't really care. I used to post like pictures of Qurans in the mouths of pigs and stuff, I don't want you to get a strike, but it's like, I used to like do some like intense stuff. I don't do it anymore because Twitter will like notify you that you've been reported, blah, blah, blah. So I think like Pakistanis can be woke by being authentic because Islam is woke. I don't know how that happened, but it is. As long as they accept LGBTQIA, and some of them are trying to, that's like the top level woke. And then maybe ADOS, American Descendants of Slave, a second level. And then Muslims are like a third tier woke, in terms of the woke hierarchy, probably. So Bangladesh, I can tell you what's going on there. they're like the most parochial people in the world. Okay. I don't have anyone reading me on the Brown Pundits blog from Bangladesh, like 2 people. Okay. Like, and they just don't care. And I've talked to a Bangladeshi friend who's an economist. He's like, yeah, they're not like Indians and Pakistanis at all. Like, they just don't care what's going on. They consume their own media. They mind their own, which is not bad. This might not be bad, you know. Like, I don't see any downloads of my podcast, even when I'm talking about Bangladesh, or like loading of my website, you know, from Bangladesh. I get way more traffic from Pakistan and a lot from India. So Pakistan and India are focused on what's happening outside the country. People in Bangladesh are not. People in Bangladesh just seem like focused on their own affairs. I think it's partly because they're so like 8 to 9% growth or whatever for like 5 years in a row does something to you psychologically in terms of what your orientation is. And so rather than spending time on the internet trying to get woke, they're spending time in the factory trying to get rich, kind of. So I think they're a little too busy for that. But I mean, it's a country where it's like gone from like a couple of million people on the internet to 100 million people in 10 years. And it's culturally still not internationally oriented. It's a very parochial, narrow worldview, which I'm happy about because I think
a very, very stark difference between the Bengal on the India side, the West Bengal, and the Bangladesh in that sense.
I guess I don't know too much about the West Bengal except they're communist. So
it's very internationalist in its outlook.
Okay, well, I mean, the Bangladesh is not. I mean, all I can go is based on my traffic. I probably have like, 10, 100 times more traffic from Kolkata than Dhaka. And I have like an English language, mostly non-Bangladesh, Bengal-oriented blog, but they just don't care. They don't know. I bet you more people in Pakistan, way more people in Pakistan know of me than in Bangladesh. Like I've never had any of my cousins mention. I have a Wikipedia page. I have some internet profile, but they've never mentioned me. Like they're just like, your kids are cute, and like, do you have Rasgulla in the United States? They're not like super concerned.
But you said a very interesting thing. The Bangladeshis are busy getting rich rather than busy getting woke. But let's say coming back to this topic, because this was our core topic, this wokeism and the relation between Anglosphere and India, there's a word beyond Anglosphere. We have France. Now, France is kind of leading the fight against this wokeism and the social sciences coming from the American universities. Do you think a backlash is emerging? A pushback is emerging against the American universities, which are going crazy by any standards? They are just going crazy. Do you think France and other countries can push back against it?
Well, I mean, they can push back. Will they succeed? Like, that's an empirical question. I think, yes, I think this is a process that's going to probably take about 10 years. I don't think it's going to happen immediately. But yes, it's going to end partly because in the United States, there's opposition to it. The Republicans are going to start seriously looking at the universities, the public universities in their states, in terms of funding. Ultimately, these people, they're all about talk. They're not about reality. So, equity, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. The easiest way to get equity and inclusion would be for a lot of white professors to resign and give their positions to non-white females. They're not doing it, are they? So ultimately, their jobs really matter to them. Their salaries really matter to them. And so if Republicans start looking at those, they might realize that perhaps they're not so woke, really quickly. So what I'm trying to say is a lot of their views are very shallow, very superficial. And so I think if we push, they may immediately concede because ultimately they want their comfortable life. They're not real revolutionaries. Real revolutionaries stay in the streets. They don't go back into the seminar room, So these are performance artists. And if you call their bluff, I think they will probably back down. The main thing is I think we who are opposed to it need to push back sooner than later because, what I like to say is the United States is holding itself hostage. It has a gun to its head and we're threatening to commit suicide if anyone moves. I mean, It's just like, at some point we're not going to have children well educated enough to be able to pivot. They will have erased their past. So, an example I like to use is from Turkey. One reason Ataturk switched from Arabic to Roman is modern Turks, they can't read their past. Like Erdogan and the Islamists might want to become Ottomans, neo-Ottomans, but they can't read their past. They need translators, and that makes a huge difference, correct?
Yeah.
It makes a huge difference. A difference in Bangladesh and Pakistan is the script. The script they use in Bangladesh is the same script they use in West Bengal.
Yeah.
The script that they use in Pakistan is different. In Punjab is obviously not Punjabi. All right. So once you separate the high culture and the elite in a literary sense, you're going to have divergence, right? People in Bangladesh can still read newspapers from Kolkata, and people in Kolkata can still read Dhaka newspapers, and they're still part of the same culture. And the greatest, poet, literary figure in Bangladesh is Rabindranath Tagore, who's obviously not a Muslim. Like now imagine some Punjabi Hindu being, the national poet of Pakistan. You can't imagine that, right? So I think you have these big differences in terms of cultural choices made, and they have downstream consequences. There are a lot of Islamists and a lot of Muslims in Bangladesh that don't like Hindus, don't like India, but until they change their script, their children and their grandchildren are still going to be able to write letters to people in Kolkata, at least until there's no more Bengalis in West Bengal and everyone's speaking Hindu or they're, jihadis. I don't know. I'm just saying West Bengal is changing a lot, and Bangladesh might actually be more culturally coherent as a Bengali cultural home than West Bengal in the future. Who knows?
I hope so. I think the future of Bangladesh is very bright as compared to the Pakistan. But interesting talk, Razib, especially the point you made in the beginning that wokeism is about the white population, about the America, is their ideology. Many Indians, many Hindus trying to play that game of victimhood, of wokeism, or even trying to speak the post-colonial language, it will just not work. Because there's no place for you in that narrative. It caters to the white population, elite, educated white population of America. There's no place for anyone else. I mean, we can become a second-grade woke coolie, but we can never be at the high table, even if we become woke. And we certainly can't counter them by being a different kind of a woke, right? So
it's about their history. It's about our history here in America. It's not about your history. Like if you try to adapt it, it's going to always be an awkward fit because ultimately it's not a general theory. It's a specific narrative.
Interesting point. But it's always interesting to talk to you, Razi, because you bring a new perspective on the topics every time. But like every good thing has to end, this conversation has to end today. It will continue, but thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah. Hey, I read the commenters, just so you know. So be funny, be funny.
Thank you, audience, for listening to us. Please subscribe to the channel and join as a member if you want to support the channel. Thank you and see you soon.